Hi, my name is Eddy, and my topic today is recycling. And my opponent's major claim was recycling fails to effectively benefit society, and their two secondary claims were recycling fails to support the economy, and two, recycling fails to help the environment. So first of all, one of the statements they made was that it is cheaper to dispose trash in a landfill over paying to recycle, and the evidence they used was, they said that on average curbside recycling programs tend to cost more than they earn from the sale of collected materials, but they didn't really specify like the costs of landfills and the cost of recycling, which I'll do right now. And so there's tipping fees for landfills, and according to the city of St. Louis of Missouri, they state that the cost of tipping fees is $35.55 per ton, and in 2009 the city landfilled 142,646 tons of solid waste from residential alley dumpsters and curbside roll carts, which cost $4,871 in landfill tipping fees. And they also stated that by recycling only 25%, they could earn $196,000 to $461,000 per year in revenue from the same amount of solid waste that was going to landfills. Now that's landfill costs, and now I'll talk about the recycling costs. And now, according to Kristen Conger from Discovery News, they said that it costs $20 to $70 per ton for picking up recyclables. And from the same article, they also said the average homeowner can put out recyclables worth about $125 per ton. So basically, it's that $125 minus the $20 to $70 per ton, and if you subtract it, you would still end up in net profit. And another supporting evidence or supporting claims they used was that they said recycling requires more energy to produce goods than to use raw materials, and I actually found that false because according to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, making a new aluminum can with recycled aluminum uses 95% less energy than using raw materials. And they also said that more jobs are provided through recycling companies. And according to the same agency, they said jobs increased at recycling manufacturers by almost 70% between 2004 to 2011, thus contributing to the economy's health. And then thirdly, they said that recycling is subsidized, and the evidence they used was in the last 2 decades, Congress has passed over 40 anti-pollution laws, and industry and government has spent nearly $1 trillion on pollution control. So that is legitimate, but that doesn't mean that all the anti-pollution laws and the amount they use on pollution control was used on recycling only. And so they didn't really specify, and other things can include in this, which is cars, electricity, chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, disposing toxic waste, conserving water, and there's much more. And to the next secondary claim is recycling fails to help the environment. So one of the statements they said was that paper production uses farm trees and actually plants more trees than destroys, which I don't see how that's really shows us how recycling fails to help the environment. I don't see how planting more trees than destroying is showing recycling fails to help the environment. And they also said that landfills can produce energy from methane gas, which doesn't necessarily mean recycling fails to help the environment. It just shows that there's some benefits from landfills. And what is relevant is that paper recycling reduces greenhouse gas emissions and saves considerable landfill spaces, and this is according to the EPA. And it also, recycling also helps the environment by creating more jobs, which I said earlier, which also helps the economic development. And according to the EPA, recycling and reuse industry consists of approximately 56,000 establishments that employ over 1.1 million people and generate an annual payroll of nearly $37 billion and gross over $236 billion in annual revenues. So all in all, I think recycling does not fail to effectively benefit society, and it actually does affect does benefit society. And that is all. Thank you.
All right, structurally everything is fine. On the first point, you basically try to give us a cost comparison and you use the fees that are being paid by St. Louis. The whole tipping fee thing, I don't know how that really helps you very much. If you've got a total on how much that ends up costing us to use landfills, then I think there's an inference to be made here. Otherwise, I think it's a piece of data without much function in this particular spot. On the recycling cost argument, you're a little bit clearer, saying that in essence there is profitability here. I think you need to kind of contrast this to whatever evidence the advocate said, and I didn't really hear any discussion of what the advocate's information was on this point. So your point sounds like it's pretty reasonable, but it sounded that way, as I recall, from the advocate also. So how am I supposed to contrast these two? I think you need to do a little bit more of that yourself. On the other hand, the argument about how much more beneficial it is, especially when it comes to energy use for aluminum cans, I thought that was pretty good, and it's a good example on that particular point. On the recycling subsidies argument, you basically have a challenge to the advocate's evidence because they talk about how much money gets spent in a whole variety of pollution control bills, and you say, well, that doesn't necessarily demonstrate anything about subsidies, and that's a valid point. Was that the only evidence that they provided on subsidies? If it was, you should say that and say the only evidence that they provide on subsidies is that there are a whole bunch of bills that have been passed that address pollution controls, and that people have to spend money in order to adhere to those things. And that's not relevant to that issue. And I think that that would be, fine. Like I said, I think this is another one of those places where you need to do a little bit more comparison. The advocates claim that recycling is largely subsidized. Again, I can't remember what their evidence was on this point, and so it's hard to figure out whether or not your example applies here. On the environmental benefits, I think that you did a good job presenting a counterclaim here that works pretty well, suggesting that there are some long-term benefits. There's kind of a challenge on what the advocate said on this particular point. This one was one where you went after the advocate's evidence on this point, and I thought you kind of explained some of the problems with it. And then you've got the counterclaim about all of the benefits that we get, reducing greenhouse gases and the jobs and the economic impact from recycling. I don't know if the advocate had a total that they ever suggested, but this gives a pretty clear contrasting total. We know we got 56,000 companies, 1.1 million jobs, $236 billion in economic activity as a result of recycling. That sounds pretty substantial. And if the advocate didn't provide any reason that that's a small figure, then it seems to me like you've got a believable case here. All right, thank you.